In the harsh expanse of the American frontier, where distrust runs as deep as canyon walls, fate weaves an unlikely tale of courage and forbidden connection. Sarah Mitchell's quiet widow's life shatters the night she discovers a wounded Apache warrior in her barn, his proud spirit undimmed despite his injuries. In a land where settlers and natives wage a blood-soaked war, she makes a choice that defies everything her community holds sacred. With nothing but desert herbs, sacred water, and her own unwavering resolve, she tends to a man her neighbors would kill on sight. As moonlit conversations turn to shared understanding, Sarah realizes that some bonds transcend the boundaries drawn by fear and hatred. But when word of her secret mercy spreads through the settlement, what price will she pay for following her? Art, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's fingers traced the worn gold band on her left hand as she watched the sun paint the Arizona territory in shades of amber and rust. 3 years had passed since influenza took James, but some mornings she still reached across the empty side of the bed, expecting to find his warmth. The homestead they'd built together stood as his legacy, 40 acres of hard-won earth that grew just enough to keep her independent, if only barely. The morning air carried the scent of sage and creosote as Sarah crossed the yard to tend her chickens. Her boots left prints in earth still damp from yesterday's rare rain, a blessing in this unforgiving land. The hens clucked their morning greetings, scratching for the feed she scattered with practiced hands. These simple routines anchored her days, giving structure to a life that had transformed so abruptly from wife to widow. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell," Thomas Wheeler's voice carried from the road. The young deputy reined his horse to a stop at her fence, touching the brim of his hat. "Thought you should know. There's been more Apache movement in the territory. Raiding party hit the Jensen place 2 days' ride south." Sarah straightened, brushing dust from her apron. "Anyone hurt?" "No, ma'am, but they took horses and supplies. Reverend Kane's calling a town meeting tonight. Says we need to organize proper." "Patrols," Thomas shifted in his saddle. "You being out here alone, maybe you ought to consider moving closer to town." The suggestion was familiar, well-meaning but unwelcome. "This is my home, Deputy Wheeler. James and I chose this land together. I'm not leaving it." "Yes, ma'am." His expression showed both respect and concern. "Just keep your doors locked and that rifle of yours loaded." After Thomas rode on, Sarah's eyes swept the distant hills. The territory's troubles weren't new. Tensions had simmered long before James's death, raids and reprisals creating cycles of violence that seemed to have no end. The settlers spoke of savages and heathens, but Sarah had always wondered about the other side of the story. Her wondering had led her to learn what she could of native healing ways, adding desert herbs and traditional remedies to the medical knowledge she'd brought. West, it was a quiet rebellion against the prejudices that dominated settler society, one that had earned her both gratitude and suspicion from her neighbors. Inside her cabin, Sarah opened the heavy wooden chest that held her medical supplies. Neat. Rows of bottles and jars caught the morning light. Tinctures of yarrow and echinacea, salves of comfrey and calendula, precious laudanum for the worst pain. Alongside these familiar medicines sat pouches of unfamiliar herbs, their uses taught to her by Maria, an elderly Mexican woman who had learned them from Apache healers in her youth. Maria was gone now, returned to her family in Tucson, but her teachings remained. "The land provides what we need," she had told Sarah, "if we have the wisdom to see it." Those words echoed as Sarah inventoried her supplies, noting what needed replenishing. The day passed in familiar tasks, tending the vegetable garden, mending, a tear in her best dress, checking the fence line for damage. As sunset approached, Sarah debated attending the town meeting. Her absence would be noted, but the thought of sitting through another session of fear-mongering held little appeal. The decision was made for her when Mrs. Cooper arrived, breathless and flustered, just as Sarah was lighting her evening lamps. The farmer's wife cradled her youngest, Eleanor, who burned with fever. "I'm sorry to come so late," Mrs. Cooper said, "but she's been getting worse all day, and Dr. Matthews is away in Prescott." "You did right to come." Sarah took the child, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "Let's see what we can do for her." For the next hour, Sarah worked with focused calm, brewing willow bark tea for the fever and preparing a poultice of sage and mullein for the chest congestion she heard in Eleanor's breathing. She added a drop of Maria's cough medicine, made from native plants whose names she'd never learned to pronounce properly. As the remedies took effect, Eleanor's breathing eased and her fever began to break. Mrs. Cooper's relief was palpable, though Sarah noticed how her eyes lingered uncertainly on the unfamiliar medicines. "I know some folks talk about my methods," Sarah said quietly, watching the sleeping child. "But I use what works, Mrs. Cooper. These plants have been healing people in this territory since long before we arrived." Mrs. Cooper nodded slowly. "You have a gift, Mrs. Mitchell. I won't forget this." She hesitated. "Though perhaps it's best if Reverend Kane doesn't hear about the Indian medicines." After they left, Sarah stood in her doorway, watching the stars emerge above the desert. The settlement's fear was a tangible thing, as real as the rough wood beneath her hand or the cool night air on her face. She understood it. Life here was hard enough without the constant threat of violence. But understanding didn't make it right. James had shared her doubts about the settlement's attitudes, though he'd been more cautious in expressing them. "The world changes slow," he'd told her once, "but it changes one heart at a time." Sarah touched her wedding ring again, smiling. At the memory, the moon was rising now, casting long shadows across her yard. In the distance, an owl called, a sound that had once made her uneasy, but now felt like part of home. She had chosen this life, this land, and whatever challenges it might bring. With a final look at the darkening landscape, Sarah closed and bolted her door. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and troubles. For now, she had her memories, her purpose, and the quiet strength James had always said was her truest gift. The whisper came just before midnight. Sarah sat at her table mending by lamplight when she heard it, a ragged sound like wind through autumn leaves, but deeper, human. Her hands stilled on the fabric as she listened, heart quickening against her will. There it came again, from the direction of the barn. The Winchester rifle hung above her fireplace, its metal gleaming in the lamp's glow. James had taught her to shoot in those first hard years on the homestead, and she'd maintained the skill out of necessity. Her fingers found the familiar weight as she lifted it down, checking that it was loaded with the automatic motions of long practice. The night air held autumn's first bite when she stepped onto her porch. Moonless darkness wrapped the yard in shadow, broken only by pale starlight and the faint glow spilling from her windows. The barn's bulk loomed ahead, its weathered boards silvered by starshine. Another sound, a scrape of movement, followed by what might have been a muffled groan. Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. Common sense said to bar her door and wait for dawn. If raiders were about, a woman alone would be a fool to investigate. But something in that sound spoke of pain rather than threat, and she had never been able to ignore suffering. Moving as quietly as her boots allowed, Sarah crossed to the barn. The heavy door was still latched, but the smaller side entrance stood slightly ajar. She was certain she'd closed it at sundown. Pressing her back against the rough wood, she listened. The whisper came again, closer now, followed by the distinct sound of labored breathing. Sarah drew a deep breath of her own, then moved. In one motion, she pushed the door wide and raised the rifle, pointing it into the darkness beyond. "Don't move," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have a gun." Silence answered. Then, from the shadows near the feed bins, came a wet cough and a single word in accented English. Peace. Sarah's hands trembled on the rifle as she reached for the lantern she kept just inside the door. It took 3 tries to light it with her shaking fingers. When the flame caught, she raised it slowly, illuminating the barn's interior in expanding circles of golden light. He lay against the feed bins, one hand pressed to his side, where dark blood seeped between his fingers. The other hand was raised, empty palm toward her in a universal gesture. His features bore the distinctive marks of Apache heritage, but it was his eyes that caught and held her, dark, fierce, and utterly without fear despite his obvious pain. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the lantern's glow. Sarah saw that he wore no war paint, and his clothing, though stained with blood and dust, spoke of status within his tribe. A medicine pouch hung at his belt, its leather worn smooth by years of handling. "You're wounded," she said at last, stating the obvious because she needed to say something. He nodded once, those remarkable eyes never leaving her face. "Shot." His English was heavily accented but clear. 2 days. Fever comes. Sarah's medical training warred with caution. The wound needed treatment. She could see infection setting in from the way he held himself and hear it in his labored breathing. But helping him would make her guilty of treason in the eyes of her neighbors. The penalty for aiding hostile natives was severe. As if reading her thoughts, he spoke again. Not raid. Message for peace. Ambush. Each word seemed to cost him effort. Die here, or buy your gun. Choose. The rifle's weight seemed to double in Sarah's hands. She looked at him, really looked, and saw beneath the pain and fever a dignity that reminded her of James. Her husband had always said, character showed clearest in how a person faced death. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice, and more like accepting something she'd known since hearing that first whisper. Sarah lowered the rifle. "I'm a healer," she said. "If you'll let me, I'll help you. But we need to move. This barn is the first place they'll look if anyone comes." Searching, relief flickered in his eyes, though his expression remained stoic. "Cannot walk far. You won't have to." Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to logistics. "There's a root cellar behind my cabin. It's dry, and no one knows about it except me. But first, I need to treat that wound." She set the rifle aside, within reach, but no longer between them, and moved closer with the lantern. The wound was a bullet hole just below his ribs, the flesh around it angry and hot to the touch. His skin burned with fever under her fingers. "My name is Sarah," she said, as she examined the injury. "Sarah Mitchell." He was silent for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then, softly, "I am called Taze. It means—" He paused, searching for the word. "Swift water." "Taze," she repeated, committing it to memory. "I need to get my medicines. Will you be all right for a few minutes?" He nodded once. Sarah caught his eyes again, held them. "I'll come back. You have my word." Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, a trust as fragile and vital as a desert flower. Then Sarah was moving, forcing herself to walk normally across the yard, in case anyone watched from the road. Inside her cabin, she gathered supplies with shaking hands, bandages, herbs, Maria's strongest poultices, the precious laudanum. Her mind screamed the madness of what she was doing, but her hands remained steady as she worked. When she returned to the barn, Taze had not moved, but his eyes followed her as she knelt beside him, watching as she laid out her supplies in the lantern light. The medicine pouch at his belt caught her attention again, a healer recognizing another's tools. "I know some of your people's medicines," she said as she began cleaning the wound. "An old Mexican woman taught me, but I will use what I have that works best if you trust me." Taze's hand moved to touch the pouch. "Knowledge is knowledge," he said through clenched teeth. "Medicine has no tribe." Sarah felt an unexpected smile touch her lips at his words. As she worked to save the life of a man she should consider her enemy, she realized that this night would change Everything. But looking into Taze's eyes, seeing the strength and wisdom there, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The moon had long since set, and dawn was still hours away. In her barn, by the light of a single lantern, Sarah Mitchell began the task of healing more than just a wounded body, though it would be some time before she understood the full meaning of what had begun this night. Moving Taze to the root cellar nearly undid all of Sarah's careful bandaging. Even with his arm across her shoulders and most of his weight on her, each step drew a sharp intake of breath that he couldn't quite suppress. The arrow she'd found embedded in his shoulder, a settler's hunting arrow, not Apache make, told a story he was still too weak to share. The cellar's entrance lay behind a thick growth of desert sage, its wooden doors hidden by careful placement of rocks and native plants. James had built it in their first year, a cool space for storing preserved foods and emergency supplies. Now it would serve a different purpose entirely. Almost there, Sarah murmured, as Taze's steps faltered. His skin burned against hers, the fever rising despite the medicines she'd given him. Inside, a narrow ladder led down to the earthen floor. "Can you manage?" He nodded once, jaw clenched. Sarah went first, holding the lantern high to light his way. Taze descended slowly, each movement precise despite his injuries. Even wounded, he moved with a warrior's control. The cellar was small but dry, with wooden shelves along one wall and a dirt floor packed hard as stone. Sarah had already laid out her thickest quilt and spare blankets. Not much of a sick room, but it would have to do. Taze sank onto the makeshift bed, his normally stoic expression cracking just enough to show his pain. Sarah worked quickly to check his bandages, relieved to find the bleeding had slowed. The arrow wound in his shoulder worried her most. Removing the barbed head had been delicate work, and infection was a constant threat out here. "Drink this," she said, mixing laudanum with water. "It will help with the pain." He took the cup but paused, eyes meeting hers in the lantern light. A question lived in that look, one that needed no translation. "Why?" Sarah held his gaze. "Because it's right," she said simply. Then after a moment, "And because I'm tired of fear making all our choices for us." Something shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps, or respect. He drank the medicine without further hesitation. As she worked, Sarah felt Taze watching. Her hands moved between traditional medicines and native remedies. When she uncorked a small jar of dark salve, his interest sharpened. "Apache medicine," he said. "Desert sage and—" He spoke a word she didn't recognize. "My friend Maria called." "It's snake root," Sarah replied, spreading the salve carefully around the bullet wound. "She said your people use it for deep injuries." Your friend was wise. His English was clearer now, though still heavily accented. "Few white women learn our ways. Few try." Sarah began wrapping fresh bandages around his torso. Most are too busy fearing what they don't understand. Above them, a sound froze them both, hoofbeats on the road drawing closer. Sarah quickly doused the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Her heart pounded as the riders passed directly overhead, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed earth. "Patrol," Taze whispered, his breath warm against her ear in the darkness. "Looking for me." Sarah held perfectly still, listening as the riders continued past her property. Only when the sound had faded completely did she dare relight the lantern with trembling hands. "They'll be back," she said, more to herself than to him. "They'll search every homestead in the territory. You fear?" It wasn't a question. "Not for myself." The truth of it surprised her as she spoke. "But if they find you here, they will kill me," he finished calmly, "and punish you." Sarah resumed bandaging his wounds, her movements more urgent now. "Then we'll have to make sure they don't find you." The medicine was taking effect. She could see it in the slight relaxation of his features, but his eyes remained sharp, studying her face in the golden lantern light. "Why do you not fear me?" he asked suddenly. "I am Apache, your enemy." Sarah's hands stilled on the bandages. In the distance, she could still hear the patrol, moving on to the next homestead. Everything she'd been taught said she should fear this man, see him as savage and dangerous. Instead, she found herself trusting the quiet dignity in his bearing, the intelligence in his eyes. "My husband used to say that hate comes from forgetting that we're all human first," she said finally. "I suppose I never learned to forget." Taze was silent for a long moment. Then, with careful precision, "Your husband was wise man." "Yes," Sarah smiled slightly. "He was." She finished tending his wounds in comfortable silence. The laudanum was working fully now. She could see sleep pulling at him despite his efforts. "To remain alert, rest," she said, gathering her supplies. "I'll bring food when it's safe and check your bandages again before dawn." Taze caught her wrist as she turned to go, his grip gentle but firm. In the lantern's glow, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, each word deliberate. "I will not forget this kindness." She nodded, unable to find words for the complexity of emotions his touch awakened. Then she was climbing the ladder, careful to make no sound as she secured the cellar doors and checked that the sage still hid them properly. In her cabin, Sarah sat for a long time at her window, watching the stars wheel overhead. The patrol would return, and tomorrow would bring new dangers. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, she felt strangely at peace with her choice. Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the desert night. Sarah smiled, remembering James's words about change, coming one heart at a time. Perhaps, she thought, it began with moments like this, when courage outweighed fear and compassion proved stronger than hatred. Dawn painted the desert in whispered shades of rose and gold when Sarah returned to the root cellar. She'd spent the hours since her last visit alternating between fitful sleep and anxious vigilance, starting at every distant sound. Now, carrying a basket of food covered with innocent-looking garden vegetables, she checked carefully for observers before slipping behind the sagebrush. Taze was awake, sitting upright against the earthen wall. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see that his fever had broken during the night. His eyes tracked her descent with a warrior's alertness, but the tension in his shoulders eased when he recognized her. "You should be lying down," she chided softly, setting her basket aside to check his bandages. "Too long lying already." His voice was stronger today, the words more sure. "2 days hiding, before your barn." As Sarah unwrapped the bandages, she found the wounds looking better than she'd dared hope. The arrow injury showed no signs of infection, and the bullet wound was clean, if angry-looking. Her combination of Western medicine and native remedies had done its work. "The necklace," she said, nodding to the intricate beadwork partially hidden beneath his shirt. "I recognize the pattern. My friend Maria once showed me a similar piece. She said only tribal leaders wear such designs." Taze's hand went to the necklace, fingers tracing the familiar patterns. For a long moment he was silent, weighing truth against caution. Then, "I am war chief of my people, but I come now for peace." Sarah's hands stilled on the fresh bandages. A war chief. No wonder the patrols searched so aggressively. If they knew they had a tribal leader in their territory. "The ambush you mentioned," she said carefully. "You were carrying a message?" "To Army Fort." Taze's eyes grew distant. "My people tire of war. Too many deaths, too many winters of hunger. I carry words for treaty talk." His mouth tightened. "But some settlers want no peace. They saw me coming with white flag. Still they shot." The implications struck Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just about helping a wounded man. She was now entangled in a peace negotiation that could affect the entire territory, and someone was actively working to prevent that peace. "Who shot you?" she asked, though she suspected he wouldn't. "Say, men who profit from war." His answer was diplomatic, but his eyes held knowledge he wouldn't share. "They watch Fort Trail. Wait for peace parties." Sarah finished rebandaging his wounds in thoughtful silence. The morning light, filtering through the cellar's cracks, grew stronger as she worked, marking the passage of precious time. Soon, she would need to be seen going about her normal routine, or risk raising suspicion. "Your medicines are strong," Taze said suddenly, both white and native. He reached for his medicine pouch, drawing out a small object wrapped in leather. "Trade knowledge for knowledge?" Sarah watched as he carefully unwrapped a bundle of dried herbs she'd never seen before. Their sharp, clean scent filled the small space. "For fever and blood loss," he explained. "Ancient knowledge. I teach you use, you teach me your healing ways." The offer startled her. Such knowledge was closely guarded by both cultures. That he would share it spoke volumes about his trust, and perhaps something more. "I'd be honored," she said softly. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the herbs, and neither pulled away immediately. In the growing light, Sarah saw something shift in his expression, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. The moment broke at the sound of approaching horses. Sarah quickly gathered her supplies, but Taze caught her hand before she could rise. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, his voice low and intense. "What you risk for me, I have no words big enough in your language." "Then say it in yours," she answered. Without thinking, something like surprise flickered across his features, followed by a ghost of a smile, the first she'd seen from him. He spoke a phrase in Apache, the words flowing like water over stones. "What does it mean?" "It means—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Some souls know each other before first meeting." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Rest," she said finally. "I'll return at midday." As she emerged into the morning light, Sarah knew she should feel more conflicted about harboring an Apache war chief. Instead, she felt an increasing certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The sun climbed higher as she began her daily chores, mind spinning with all she'd learned. Taze was no simple warrior, and his mission was far more important than she'd imagined. The territory balanced on a knife's edge between war and peace, and somehow, improbably, her little homestead had become a pivotal point in that balance. She thought of the warmth in Taze's eyes, the gentle touch of his hand, and the strange rightness of teaching each other their healing ways. Perhaps this was how peace really began. Not with grand treaties or military negotiations, but with small moments of shared humanity, one heart at a time. The days took on a strange rhythm, measured in secret visits and whispered conversations. Sarah maintained her normal routines, tending chickens, working her garden, accepting the occasional patient, while carrying the weight of her hidden knowledge like a riverstone in her heart. In the hours between, she and Taze shared a kind of healing. "This word," he asked on the third afternoon, pointing to a page in her medical journal where she recorded treatments and remedies. Sarah had brought it down to show him her notes on combining their healing traditions. "Inflammation," she said, watching him shape the word silently. His command of English grew stronger daily, their conversations deepening as language barriers fell away. She pointed to another entry. "And this one means infection." Taze nodded, then spoke the Apache words for the same conditions. Sarah repeated them carefully, earning one of his rare smiles when she managed the pronunciation correctly. These exchanges had become precious to her, not just the sharing of medical knowledge, but the quiet moments between, when stories flowed as naturally as desert streams after rain. "Your people believe illness comes from spirits," she said, noting the way his fingers traced the drawings she'd made of medicinal plants. "But you use physical medicines, like we do." "All things connected," he replied. "Body, spirit, land." He touched the dried herbs they'd been studying. "Plants are spirit. Medicine made solid. Like stars are spirit fires made visible." Sarah found herself drawn to the poetry in his way of seeing the world. It reminded her of Maria's teachings, but went deeper, touching something ancient and true. She had begun recording his words in her journal, not just the medical knowledge, but the wisdom behind it, As Taze's strength returned, their conversations ranged beyond medicine. He told her of his people's struggles, of the desperate need for peace, and of his own journey from warrior to leader. She spoke of her life with James, of her choice to stay on the homestead after his death, and of her growing disillusionment with settler attitudes. "Your heart is not afraid to cross boundaries," he observed one evening, watching her combine their medicines to make a new kind of healing salve. Like water, finding new paths through stone. The comment stirred something in Sarah's memory. "Your name," she said, "Swift Water, is that why they called you this?" A shadow of old pain crossed his features. "As boy, I fell in flash flood. Everyone thought dead, but water carried me to new place. Medicine man said water chose me." He touched his necklace, said I would make new paths for my people. Sarah's hands stilled on the herbs she was grinding. "And now you seek peace, making a new path between our peoples. If path exists to be made," his dark eyes held hers. "Some walls too high to cross. Some walls are only shadows," she answered softly, "cast by fear and habit. The air between them grew thick with unspoken things." Sarah found herself acutely aware of his presence, the quiet strength in his hands, the intelligence in his eyes, the way his shoulder brushed hers as they worked together in the cellar's close confines. Their days fell into dangerous comfort. Sarah taught him to read simple English words from her journal, while he showed her how to find and prepare herbs she'd never known existed. They spoke of their people's different ways of seeing the world, finding unexpected common ground in their shared respect for life and healing, but comfort bred risk. Twice more, patrols passed close enough to hear their boots overhead. Sarah learned to keep her expression neutral when neighbors mentioned Apache sightings, though her heart raced at every rumor. She wrote careful entries in her journal, recording their shared discoveries in a code of her own devising. Desert sage prepared in traditional way shows remarkable efficacy. Teacher says timing of harvest critical. Must gather under morning stars for full potency. The word teacher became her way of referring to Taze in her notes, though she knew even that much was dangerous. If anyone found her journal, questions would be asked that she couldn't answer. Yet she couldn't stop writing, couldn't stop trying to preserve these precious days of shared discovery. Something profound was happening in her root cellar, not just the healing of wounds or the exchange of medical knowledge, but the bridging of worlds that had been separated by generations of fear and misunderstanding. One afternoon, as Sarah demonstrated how to make a tincture, Taze caught her hand. The touch sent awareness shimming through her like heat lightning over summer hills. "Why do you write our words?" he asked. "Why keep such dangerous knowledge?" Sarah looked at their joined hands, his darker skin against her paler shade, both marked with the gentle stains of healing herbs. "Because truth shouldn't die just because it's dangerous," she said. "Because what we're learning here, it matters." His thumb traced a small circle on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "More than medicine being learned," he said softly. Sarah met his eyes, seeing in them the same recognition that burned in her own heart. The walls between their worlds were crumbling, stone by stone, replaced by something both beautiful and terrifying in its possibility. Later, alone in her cabin, Sarah added a final entry to her journal. "Some medicines heal more than body or spirit. Some truths change everything they touch. God help me. I think I'm learning both." Sarah felt the change in the settlement before she saw it. It was there in the way conversations stopped when she approached the general store, in the measuring looks cast her way after Sunday services. Like shadows lengthening before a storm, suspicion crept through the community with quiet persistence. "We've noticed you haven't attended the last 2 town meetings," Reverend Kane said, stopping her outside the church. His voice carried the weight of authority, wrapped in pastoral concern. "These are dangerous times, Mrs. Mitchell. The community must stand together." Sarah clutched her family Bible closer, its leather worn smooth by generations of hands. "I've had patients to tend, Reverend. Fever season's coming on." "Yes, your unusual medicines." He studied her face. "There's been talk about that as well. Some feel your methods have become increasingly native in nature." The word native fell between them like a stone in still water. Sarah kept her expression carefully neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I use what works, Reverend. Suffering doesn't care where healing comes from." "Perhaps. But there are those who question where such knowledge leads. Mrs. Cooper mentioned certain remedies you used for her child." His pale eyes held hers. "Tell me, Mrs. Mitchell, how does a respectable widow come to know Apache healing ways?" Sarah thought of her journal hidden beneath floorboards, of Taze waiting in her cellar, of knowledge freely shared in defiance of generations of hatred. "My friend Maria taught me, as you well know, before she returned to Tucson." "Ah, yes, the Mexican woman." His tone suggested this explanation hardly improved matters. "And have you had any other teachers since then?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Only experience and necessity, Reverend. Out here we can't afford to ignore knowledge that might save lives. Lives are indeed precious, Mrs. Mitchell, which is why we must be vigilant." He gestured toward her homestead. "You live quite alone out there. It would be unfortunate if your independence led to choices that endangered the settlement." The threat was gentle but unmistakable. Sarah gripped her Bible tighter, feeling the familiar verses press against her palm, verses about loving one's neighbor, about mercy and understanding. How strange that those teaching love could speak so easily of hate. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend," she said carefully. "But I made a promise to James to keep our home. I intend to honor it. Your husband was a good man." The Reverend's voice softened slightly. He understood the importance of community, of choosing the right side. Sarah thought of James's quiet doubts, his gentle questions about the justice, of their expansion. She wondered what the Reverend would say if he knew her husband had sometimes traded fairly with Apache bands, sharing water and supplies when he could. "Yes," she said simply, "he taught me to follow my conscience." The Reverend's expression hardened. "Conscience must be guided by wisdom, Mrs. Mitchell. These savages are not like us. They cannot be trusted, cannot be reasoned with. Any sympathy toward them is misplaced at best, treasonous at worst." Sarah felt the weight of the settlement's fear in his words. Generations of mistrust hardened into unshakable certainty. She thought of Taze's dignity, his wisdom, the gentle way he spoke of hope for peace, despite all he'd suffered. "Good day, Reverend," she said, turning away before her face could betray her. "I have patience waiting." His voice followed her. "Remember, Mrs. Mitchell, God sees all our choices." Walking home, Sarah felt eyes tracking her movement through the settlement. Mothers drew children closer as she passed. Men touched their gun belts unconsciously. The community's trust, built over years of sharing their joys and sorrows, was fraying like old rope. In her cabin, she sank into a chair, Bible still clutched to her chest. The book fell open to a worn page, the story of the Good Samaritan, a tale of mercy crossing boundaries of hate. She traced the familiar words, thinking of another story being written in secret beneath her feet. "God sees all our choices," she whispered to the empty room. "Yes, Reverend, that's exactly what I'm counting on." Evening wrapped the desert in purple shadows as Sarah crushed desert sage in her medicine bowl, its sharp scent mingling with the earthy dampness of the root cellar. Taze sat cross-legged beside her, strong enough now to move easily, watching her work with quiet intensity. "The settlers fear this plant," she said, adding drops of precious alcohol to make a tincture. "They call it witch's herb, say it's evil medicine." She smiled faintly. "But it fights fever better than anything in my medical texts." "Fear makes many good things evil," Taze replied, reaching for his own bundle of herbs. "Like fear makes many good people enemies." His fingers moved with practiced grace, separating leaves from stems. "These heal heart pain," he explained. "Both kinds." Sarah paused in her work. "Both kinds? Pain here," he touched his chest, "and pain here." His hand moved to rest over his heart. "Medicine for body, medicine for spirit, cannot heal one without other." The wisdom in his words struck her deeply. How often had she seen physical ailments rooted in deeper hurts, grief, loneliness, fear. Her own medical training had drawn hard lines between body and spirit, but Taze's healing ways saw no such boundaries. "Show me," she said softly. He guided her hands through the preparation, speaking both in Apache and English, teaching not just the method, but the meaning behind it. The herb had to be gathered at dawn, he explained, when the plant's spirit was strongest. The leaves were dried in sunlight, the roots in darkness, honoring both aspects of its power. "Your people write medicine in books," he said, watching her take notes in her journal. "My people write in memory, in stories passed down. Both ways. Hold truth." Sarah looked up from her writing. "But stories can change with telling. Words on paper stay the same." Taze's eyes held a hint of amusement. "Paper burns, memory lives. When soldiers burned our camps, our medicine lived in here." He touched his temple. "In here." His hand moved to his heart. "No fire can touch such knowing." The thought sobered her. How much knowledge had been lost to fear and violence? How many healing ways had vanished in the smoke of burning camps? Yet here they sat, sharing what remained, building something new from the ashes of old hatreds. "There is story," Taze continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a tale often told, of first medicine woman. She learned healing from watching animals, from listening to plants speak. She saw how deer ate certain leaves when sick, how bears found roots for strength. She taught that all nature is one circle. What harms one part harms all. "Like your people and mine," Sarah said quietly. "Harming each other harms ourselves." "Yes." His hand covered hers where it rested on the medicine bowl. "But healing also spreads in circles." The touch sent warmth spreading through her chest, like medicine for her own spirit. They worked in comfortable silence for a time, their hands moving in the ancient rhythms of healing craft. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the subtle scent of sage and leather that clung to him, the graceful strength in his movements, the way his shoulder brushed hers as they worked. "What does your medicine say?" she asked finally. "About healing the divide between peoples." Taze was quiet for a long moment, rolling a sprig of sage between his fingers. "Old ones teach, greatest medicine is seeing truth in enemies' eyes. When you see their spirit, not their weapons, healing begins." He met her gaze. "Like you saw mine, that first night." Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his look. "I saw. Someone in pain who needed help, nothing more. You saw me," he said simply. "Not Apache, not enemy, just me." The air between them grew thick with unspoken things. Sarah found herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by something stronger than conscious thought. Taze's hand rose to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. In that moment, the barriers between their worlds seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. They were not settler and Apache, not healer and warrior, but simply two souls recognizing something profound and true in each other. A dog's bark shattered the moment, distant but sharp. Reality crashed back like cold water, the settlements, suspicions, the dangers they faced, the impossible nature of what grew between them. Yet even as Sarah pulled away, she knew something fundamental had shifted. Like the medicine they created together, they had become something new, neither fully one world nor the other, but perhaps a bridge between both. The letter lay on Sarah's porch like a coiled rattler, a single sheet of rough paper, folded once, and weighted with a stone. She found it at dawn, dew-damp and ominous. The handwriting was deliberately crude, but the message cut sharp as a knife. "Indian lovers get what's coming to them. Last warning." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the words again. The threat wasn't unexpected. She'd felt it building in sideways glances and whispered conversations, but seeing it written made it terrifyingly real. She glanced toward the root cellar, hidden behind its screen of sage. Had someone seen something? Had she grown careless in her daily visits? Inside her cabin, she fed the letter into her stove's flames, watching until it curled to ash. But burning paper couldn't burn away fear. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The knock at her door nearly stopped her heart. "Mrs. Mitchell," Thomas Wheeler's voice carried through the wood. "Sorry to trouble." "You so early?" Sarah smoothed her skirts, checked that her expression revealed nothing, and opened the door. The young deputy stood awkwardly on her porch, hat in hands. "Deputy Wheeler, what brings you by?" "Well, ma'am," he shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "There's been more Apache signs in the territory. Reverend Kane asked me to check on the outlying homesteads. Make sure everyone's safe." The concern in his voice seemed genuine, but Sarah caught the way his eyes scanned her yard, lingered on the path to her barn. Looking for tracks, she realized, signs of visitors. "That's very thoughtful," she said carefully. "But as you can see, I'm fine, just tending to my usual work." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "About that work. Some folks are worried about you out here alone, using those Indian medicines and such." "I use what helps people heal, Thomas. You know that. Your own mother's arthritis remedy came from my Indian medicines." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know, ma'am, and you've done right by lots of folks, but times are dangerous. Maybe you should consider moving into town for a spell, until things settle." Sarah thought of Tarzay hiding below their feet, of the vital peace mission delayed by his wounds, of the knowledge they shared in precious stolen hours. "This is my home, deputy. I'm not leaving it." "No, ma'am, I didn't expect you would." He placed his hat back on his head. "Just be careful, Mrs. Mitchell. Not everyone understands your ways. And some folks—" He paused. "Some folks are looking for excuses." After he rode away, Sarah leaned against her doorframe, legs weak with tension. The warning letters ash still. Dusted her fingertips, a reminder of how quickly safety could burn away. She waited until mid-morning before visiting the root cellar, maintaining her normal routine in case watching eyes remained. When she finally descended the ladder, she found Tarzay already alert, reading the danger in her face. "Something comes," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah told him about the letter, about Thomas's visit. As she spoke, she saw his warrior's mind working, calculating risks and options. "I should go," he said when she finished. "Bring no more danger to you. You're not fully healed." Sarah's protest came quick and fierce. "And the settlers are watching the trails. You'd never make it to the fort. I have brought shadow to your life." His voice carried pain that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "Your people turn against you because of me. My people turn against me because of their own fear." Sarah knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "If I let that fear rule my choices, I'm no better than those who shot you." Tarzay's fingers tightened on hers. "Sarah Mitchell," he said softly, "your courage shames braves who count coup. It's not courage." She met his intense gaze. "It's knowing what's right and doing it anyway. Same thing." His thumb traced patterns on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "But right path, often loneliest." The truth of that settled heavy in her chest. She thought of the settlement's growing hostility, of friends turning away, of dangers gathering like storm clouds. Yet here, in this underground sanctuary with a man she should call enemy, she felt more right than she had since James's death. "Then, we walk it together," she said firmly, "until you're healed, until you can complete your mission." She managed a small smile. "After all, what would your people think if I let their war chief leave with his medicine unfinished?" His answering smile was brief but real, yet Sarah saw the worry lingering in his eyes, felt it echo her own fear. The threat wasn't just to them now, it was to the chance for peace itself. And somewhere above, unknown eyes might be watching, waiting for one mistake to bring their fragile world crashing down. That night, for the first time since his arrival, Taze followed Sarah from the root cellar. His wounds had healed enough for careful movement, and the darkness offered what little safety they could find. The air held autumn's bite, but the sky blazed with stars so bright they seemed to sing. "I've been underground too long," he said, softly, tilting his face to the heavens. "Spirit needs star medicine." Sarah watched him in the starlight, struck by how naturally he seemed to belong in her small garden, as if he'd always been meant to stand there. He moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to reading darkness, every motion considered and sure. "There," he said, pointing upward, "your people call that North Star. We call it stone that never moves. Ancient ones used it to find way." "Oh." Sarah stepped closer, following his gesture. "And those?" She indicated a cluster of stars that had always reminded her of scattered seeds. "Ah." His voice warmed with remembered stories. "We call that Spider-Woman's web. She weaves dreams, teaches women to weave beauty from thread." He glanced at her. "Your people have different stories for same stars. The Greeks called that cluster the Pleiades, 7 sisters running from a hunter." She smiled at his interest. "Every culture sees its own truth in the stars, I suppose." "Truth is truth," Taze said thoughtfully, "just seen from different mountains." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Like you and I see same stars, same earth, same heart." Sarah's breath caught at the touch, at the words that seemed to echo the pulse of her own thoughts. They stood in comfortable silence, hands joined, while night creatures sang their ancient songs around them. "I had star map," Taze said eventually. "Old one, drawn on deer hide, showed safe paths through territory, places where water stays sweet all year. Lost it in ambush." His voice carried old pain. "Many generations of knowledge on that hide. Could you make another?" He nodded slowly. "Stars remember. Story lives here." He touched his chest. But map was more than stars. Showed peace trails, places where tribes met to trade, to heal old wounds. Important now, when peace so needed. Sarah thought of her medical journal, where she recorded their shared healing knowledge. "We could make a new one," she offered. "Together. Your knowledge, my paper." Taze turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. "You would do this? Keep our ways, our stories?" "Knowledge shouldn't die because of fear or hatred," she said softly. "What we're learning together, it matters. It could help others find their way." His free hand rose to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, her name like a prayer in his voice. "You have warrior's heart in healer's hands." The moment stretched between them, fragile and infinite as starlight. Sarah felt the last barriers within her heart crumbling like desert sand. Here, under the vast sky that belonged to no one and everyone, the differences between their worlds seemed to fade into insignificance. When Taze kissed her, it felt as natural as sunrise. His lips were warm despite the night's chill, carrying the taste of sage and promises. Sarah's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, the solid reality of him. The kiss deepened, speaking things that neither of their languages had words to capture. When they finally parted, Taze rested his forehead against hers. "My people say some souls know each other from before birth," he murmured. "Walk many lives together, finding each other again and again. Is that what this is?" Sarah's voice wavered with emotion. "Recognition? More than that." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. Some meetings changed the pattern of stars themselves. Around them, the desert night hummed with life. Coyotes singing to the moon, owls gliding on silent wings, small creatures rustling through sagebrush. The stars wheeled overhead, telling their ancient stories to anyone wise enough to listen. "We should go in," Sarah said reluctantly. It's not safe to stay out too long. Taze nodded, but neither moved immediately. They stood wrapped in starlight, and each other, caught in a moment that seemed to exist outside of time and trouble. Finally, they made their way back to the root cellar, moving as quietly as shadows. At the entrance, Taze caught Sarah's hand once more. "Whatever comes," he said softly in Apache, then repeated in English, "My heart walks with yours." Sarah squeezed his hand, unable to find words for the mix of joy and fear that filled her chest. They both knew this night had changed everything, had made their already dangerous situation infinitely more complex. Yet neither could regret the truth that had bloomed between them under the watching stars. Later, in her cabin, Sarah added a new entry to her journal. "Some medicines heal the heart itself. Some stars guide us home to places we've never been. Tonight, I learned both." The piece shattered with the sound of breaking wood. Sarah was in her garden when she heard it, the crack of someone kicking through her fence. She straightened, heart freezing as she saw 3 riders pushing through the gap, Reverend Kane in the lead, Mrs. Mitchell. The Reverend's voice carried the cold certainty of judgment. "Step away from the house." Behind him, she recognized Thomas Wheeler, shame evident in his downturned face, and Nathan Cooper, whose wife she'd helped so recently. All 3 men carried rifles. "What is the meaning of this?" Sarah forced her voice to remain steady, though her eyes darted to the root cellar entrance. Had they seen something? Known something? "We've had reports," Kane said, dismounting with deliberate slowness, "of smoke signals from this area, Apache communications," his pale eyes fixed on her, "and certain witnesses who've seen you speaking to the air behind your house, almost as if talking to someone hidden." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd grown careless, too comfortable in their secret routine. Had someone seen her daily conversations with Taze through the cellar's ventilation spaces? "I talk to myself sometimes," she said. "It's a widow's habit, lonely out here." "Indeed." Kane gestured to the other men who began to spread out across her yard. "Then you won't mind if we search your property, for the settlement's safety, of course." Sarah stepped forward, anger overtaking fear. "You have no right." "We have every right." Kane's facade of calm cracked slightly. "When a member of our community betrays us to savages, we have not just the right, but the duty to act." He pulled a crumpled paper from his coat. "Especially when we find this in your stove." Sarah's heart sank. The threatening letter. She'd been so careful to burn it completely, but obviously not careful enough. Some fragment had survived, carrying its poison to the wrong hands. "That proves nothing," she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. A shout from Nathan Cooper cut through her protest. "Tracks here, behind the sagebrush." "No." Sarah's world tilted as Cooper began pulling away the carefully arranged plants hiding the cellar doors. She had to stop this, had to find some way. The sound of the cellar doors being thrown open was like thunder in her ears. For one desperate moment, she prayed Taze had heard them coming, had found some way to hide or escape. Then she heard the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. "Come out slowly," Kane called into the darkness. "Hands where we can see them." The silence stretched, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Sarah found herself holding her breath, caught between terror and hope. Then from the cellar's depths came the sound of steady footsteps on the ladder. Taze emerged into the sunlight, like a spirit materializing from shadow. Despite his weeks of hiding, he carried himself with unmistakable dignity. His warriors. Bearing was evident in every line of his body, and even unarmed, he radiated dangerous capability. "Dear God," Thomas Wheeler breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. "That's not just any Apache, that's the war chief," Kane finished, his voice thick with triumph and disgust. "The one they've been hunting." He swung to face Sarah, rifle aimed at her heart. "You've been harboring their leader, a murderer of white settlers. He comes in peace." Sarah moved to stand between the rifles and Taze, feeling the heat of his body close behind her. He carries a message for the Vought for peace talks. Peace! Kane's laugh was bitter as winter wind. The only peace comes when these savages are driven from our lands entirely. He gestured sharply with his rifle. Step aside, Mrs. Mitchell. Don't make your crimes worse than they already are. Sarah. Taze's voice was low, meant for her alone. Do as he says. No more danger for you. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes. In them she saw not defeat, but determination, and something that made her heart clench with sudden fear. He was preparing to fight, she realized, to create a distraction that might let her escape the consequences of helping him. No, she said, firmly, not moving from her protective stance. Whatever comes, we face it together. Touching, Kane sneered, but this ends now. Cooper, Wheeler, bind them both. We'll let the settlement decide their fate. Sarah felt Taze tense behind her, his warrior's instincts warring with concern for her safety. The afternoon sun cast their shadows long across her broken fence. Settler and Apache, healer and warrior, their silhouettes merging into one on the hard-packed earth. In that moment, with rifles aimed and futures shattering, Sarah felt an odd sense of peace. They'd known this might come, had known their time was borrowed from the beginning, but what had grown between them, the healing and wisdom they'd shared, the love that had bloomed against all reason, that was real. That was worth whatever price. They now had to pay. Together, she whispered again, reaching back to grasp his hand, his fingers twined with hers, strong and sure. Whatever came next would change everything, but in this moment they were one. Their hearts beating in time, their shadows mingled on the earth that belonged to no one and everyone. The world exploded into motion with the speed of a striking snake. As Cooper and Wheeler moved to bind them, Taze's hand slipped from Sarah's, and suddenly he was moving with the liquid grace of a lifetime's combat training. His first sweep took Wheeler's feet from under him, sending the young deputy sprawling. The second movement put Sarah behind him, shielded from Kane's rifle. "Run," he breathed. But Sarah was already moving, not away, but toward the barn where she kept her horses saddled during these dangerous times. She heard Kane's shout of rage, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle shot. Splinters flew from the barn door beside her as she yanked it open. Inside, her mare Spirit nickered in alarm. At her rushed entrance, Sarah's hands shook as she pulled the bridle from its peg, but her movements were sure, years of practice serving her when conscious thought failed. Behind her, she heard the sounds of struggle, of men shouting and bodies hitting dirt. She led, Spirit out the back door of the barn, her heart thundering against her ribs. Taze appeared as if summoned by her thoughts, moving like a shadow through the growing dusk. Blood ran from a shallow cut above his eye, but his movements were unhampered as he swung up behind her on Spirit's back. "Yah!" Sarah's cry split the air as Spirit leaped forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them. They crashed through the remains of her fence just as more riders appeared on the road, reinforcements drawn by the sound of gunfire. "Which way?" She called over her shoulder as Spirit's hooves pounded the hard earth. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of blood and gold, casting long shadows that could hide pursuit. "North," Taze's voice was tight with tension. "There is canyon, old ways through it. Horses cannot follow fast there." Sarah felt his warm strength pressed against her back, his arms secure around her waist as they rode. Behind them, shouts and the thunder of pursuit grew louder. Spirit was strong and sure-footed, but she couldn't outrun fresh horses forever. They crested a ridge just as the sun touched the horizon. Below them the land fell away into a maze of red rock canyons. Sarah felt Taze shift behind her, scanning the terrain with a warrior's eye. "There," he pointed to a nearly invisible break in the cliffs. "Old Apache trail, narrow for horse, but Spirit can make it." Sarah heard the confidence in his voice, not just in the path, but in her skills as a rider. She'd grown up on horseback, learning the way of it before she could walk. Now those skills might mean the difference between life and death. "Hold tight," she warned, then guided Spirit toward the gap. Behind them, their pursuers appeared on the ridge, their shouts carrying clearly in the cooling air. The canyon path was a nightmare of switchbacks and loose shale, barely wide enough for spirits. Hooves! Sarah felt Tarzay's tension in the way he gripped her waist, but his trust in her never wavered. She gave Spirit her head, letting the mare pick her own way down the treacherous slope. Gunshots echoed off the canyon walls, but the shooters were firing blind now, the gathering darkness and difficult terrain working in their favor. Still, Sarah knew they couldn't rely on darkness alone. The settlers would bring torches, would track them through the night if they had to. "There is cave," Tarzay spoke close to her ear as they reached the canyon floor. "Hidden place where my people used to shelter," but he hesitated. "Choice must be yours, Sarah Mitchell. To help me escape is one thing. To follow where I lead, that is another." Sarah reined Spirit to a walk, considering. Behind them lay everything she'd built. Her home, her practice, her place in the settlement. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the very real possibility of death if they were caught. But home had stopped being about place the moment she'd found Tarzay in her barn. Home had become the wisdom in his eyes, the gentle strength of his hands, the way he saw the world as a circle of connection rather than a line of division. "I chose my path the night I decided to help you," she said firmly. "I choose it still." She felt rather than saw his smile in the gathering darkness. His hand covered hers on the reins for a moment, a touch that carried more meaning than words could hold. They rode deeper into the maze of canyons as true night fell. The pursuit grew more distant, confused by the twisting paths and increasing darkness. Spirit picked her way carefully, guided by Sarah's gentle hands and Tarzay's quiet directions. When they finally reached the hidden cave, its entrance concealed by a fall of rock, Sarah felt the weight of history around them. How many others had sheltered here, she wondered, fleeing violence or carrying messages of peace? "We rest here," Tarzay said, as they dismounted. "Tomorrow, we ride for my people's lands." He caught her hands in his. "Last chance to turn back?" Sarah looked up at him in the starlight that filtered through the cave's hidden opening. "My path is forward," she said simply, "with you." His kiss tasted of dust and danger and hope, the flavor of a future being written with every heartbeat they shared. Dawn found them moving through a landscape Sarah had only seen from a distance, the deep heart of Apache territory. Spirit walked steadily beneath them, her steps sure despite the rough terrain. They shared a water gourd pass between them, its contents precious in the growing heat. "See there?" Tarzay pointed to marks on a red rock face that Sarah would have mistaken for natural weathering. "Sign left by my people, tells of water, of safe paths." His arm was warm around her waist as he guided their direction. "You read tracks of sickness in people's faces. We read tracks of life in Earth's face." Sarah studied the subtle markings with new eyes. Since leaving the canyon, Tarzay had begun teaching her to see the land as his people saw it, not as wilderness to be conquered, but as a living text written in rock and shadow. "What does that one mean?" She nodded toward another set of marks, these etched more deliberately into stone. "Ah," his voice carried a smile. "That tells story of Coyote, who tried to steal rain from Thunder Being. Good medicine story. Teaches about balance, about consequences of greed." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the sun climbing higher. Sarah felt the weight of her medical satchel against her hip, filled with both her medicines and Tarzay's. Their shared knowledge carried forward into an uncertain future. "Your people will not welcome me easily," she said finally, voicing the fear that had lingered since their escape. Tarzay's arms tightened slightly around her. "Some will fear, yes, as your people feared me." He was quiet for a moment. "But you come carrying peace mission, sharing healing wisdom. Old ones will see truth in that. And the young ones. Young ones must learn what we learn. That strength is not in walls we build, but bridges. His voice carried the weight of leadership. My people know cost of hate. Many are ready for new path. They stopped to rest spirit near a hidden spring, its presence marked by the subtle signs Taze had been teaching her to read. As Sarah refilled their water gourd, she watched him scan the horizon with a warrior's careful attention. Riders, he said suddenly. My people, but not friendly patrol. War party. Sarah's heart jumped. Will they listen if you speak to them? Young warriors, angry ones. See only white woman in our lands. He moved to Mount Spirit. We ride. Different path. They pushed hard through the heat of the day, taking routes so subtle Sarah would never have seen them as trails. Taze spoke, softly in Apache as they rode, teaching her words she might need. Peace, friendship, healing, truth. When they stopped again, the sun was setting. Sarah's muscles ached from hours of riding, but her mind was alive with all she'd learned. She watched Taze move through the ritual of making camp, his actions speaking of years of living close to the land. Tell me, she said as they shared dried meat and the last of their water, what will your people think of a war chief who brings them a white woman instead of war? Taze looked at her across their small fire. They will think what I tell them. True, that greatest victory is winning peace, not battle. His eyes held hers. That strongest medicine comes from joining wisdom, not fighting over it. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it. What will they think of us? He moved to sit beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. There are stories, he said slowly, of spirit marriages, souls who find each other across boundaries of tribe, of time. His hand found hers in the gathering darkness. Old ones say such meetings are sacred, meant to weave peoples together. Spirit marriages, Sarah repeated softly, thinking of how naturally their hands fit together, how easily their different healing ways had merged into something new and powerful. My grandmother was daughter of such union, he continued. Mexican woman who fell in love with Apache warrior. She brought new medicines, new ways of seeing. People feared at first, then saw wisdom in mixing streams of knowledge. Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest, fragile as desert flowers after rain. And your grandmother, was she accepted, became great healer, taught that love builds stronger bonds than fear. He touched her cheek gently, like you teach now, with your brave heart. A sound in the darkness brought them both alert, horses approaching. But Taze relaxed almost immediately, a smile touching his lips. Friends, he said, good scouts who see truth before judging. He called out in Apache, and two riders materialized from the shadows like spirits taking form. Sarah watched as Taze spoke with them, their conversation flowing too fast for her limited understanding. But she saw the moment when understanding dawned in the scouts' eyes, saw them look at her with new awareness as Taze explained their mission, their shared purpose. One of the scouts dismounted, approaching her with deliberate steps. From his medicine pouch, he drew out a small gourd of water. With careful ceremony, he offered it to her. He offers water friendship, Taze translated softly. Old custom means you are guest of our people, under protection. Sarah accepted, the gourd with both hands, honoring the moment's significance. As she drank, she tasted more than water. She tasted promise, possibility, and the first sweet drops of acceptance. The Apache camp appeared like a mirage at sunset, blending so naturally with the landscape that Sarah might have missed it if not for Taze's guidance. Smoke from cooking fires rose straight into the darkening sky, carrying the scent of pine and meat. Children stopped their play to stare as they rode in. Women paused in their work, and warriors materialized from shadows, hands never far from weapons. Taze sat straight and proud behind her, his presence both protection and presentation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority, introducing her first in Apache, then in English for her benefit. Sarah Mitchell, healer who saved my life, who chooses truth over fear, medicine over hatred. An elderly woman emerged from the largest shelter, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. The respect with which others moved aside marked her as someone of importance. Her eyes, sharp as desert hawks, studied Sarah with unsettling intensity. "My grandmother," Tarzay murmured, "medicine woman of the band." Sarah dismounted carefully, conscious of every movement being judged. She dressed that morning in her plainest clothes, removing any signs of settler prosperity that might cause offense. Now she stood straight but unthreatening, meeting the old woman's gaze with respect rather than challenge. The medicine woman spoke in Apache, her voice carrying the texture of aged leather. Tarzay translated. "She asks what medicines you carry." Sarah reached slowly for her satchel, aware of the tension around her. With deliberate movements, she withdrew the medicines they had created together during their hidden days, the blending of her knowledge and Apache wisdom. "I carry healing," she said clearly, letting Tarzay translate. "Both your ways and mine joined in respect and understanding." The old woman's eyes narrowed. She barked a command, and young women brought forward a peace pipe, its surface carved. With symbols of power and tradition, the medicine woman took it, but instead of offering it directly, she held it out to Tarzay with words that made him draw a sharp breath. "She says I must speak truth of you to the council," he translated. "Before peace pipe is shared or rejected." Warriors were already gathering in a circle, their faces illuminated by the growing firelight. Sarah recognized the gravity of the moment. Her future, perhaps her very life, would be decided here. The council fire blazed high as Tarzay spoke. Sarah caught words she recognized: medicine, peace, healing, woven through his testimony. He spoke of her courage in tending his wounds, of their shared discoveries in healing craft, of her choice to aid the peace mission at great personal cost. Other voices rose. Questions, challenges, arguments. Sarah wished desperately that she could understand more, but she read the dynamics in their faces, their postures. Some showed interest, others skepticism, a few open hostility. Finally, a warrior she hadn't noticed before stepped into the firelight. Unlike the others, he wore the scars of recent battle, and his eyes held the burning light of zealotry. "He says, you cannot trust white medicine or white peace," Tarzay translated quietly. "Says I am foolish to bring settler woman into our hearts." The warrior spoke again, his voice rising with passion. Sarah didn't need translation to understand he was recounting crimes of settlers against his people. With each word, the mood of the council darkened. Before Tarzay could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "I ask to speak," she said firmly. A murmur ran through the gathering. The medicine woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I know the crimes of my people," Sarah began, letting Tarzay translate. "I have seen the hatred that grows from fear, and the fear that grows from ignorance. But I have also seen the wisdom in your ways, the healing in your medicines, the truth in your stories." She drew a deep breath. "I cannot undo what others have done, but I can offer what I am, a healer who believes that medicine knows no boundaries, that knowledge shared makes both people stronger." She reached into her satchel and withdrew her medical journal. "Here, I have recorded our combined healing wisdom, your ways and mine, working together, not to steal your knowledge, but to preserve it, to honor it, to help it grow." She held the journal out to the medicine woman. "Judge me not by the crimes of others, but by the medicine I carry in my hands and heart." Silence fell around the council fire. The medicine woman took the journal, turning its pages slowly. Sarah saw her eyes widen at certain entries, saw her fingers trace the careful drawings of herbs and preparations. Finally, the old woman looked up. She spoke at length, her words carrying the weight of judgment. Sarah watched Tarzay's face, saw relief wash over his features. "She says," he translated, voice thick with emotion, "that true medicine shows itself in actions, not words, that you have proven yourself by choosing healing over hatred, truth over safety." He paused as his grandmother spoke again. "She says Some boundaries are meant to be crossed so that new wisdom can grow. The medicine woman stepped forward, offering the peace pipe first to Sarah, then to Taze. "Welcome, daughter," she said in carefully practiced English. "Teach us your medicines and learn ours. Let us make new healing together." As Sarah accepted the pipe with trembling hands, she felt the weight of history shifting around them. In the fire's glow, she saw not just acceptance, but possibility, the chance to build something new from the ashes of old hatreds. Taze's hand found hers as they shared the pipe, sealing their place in a story larger than themselves. Dawn found Sarah sitting outside the medicine woman's lodge, watching the camp come alive with morning activities. She touched the silver cross at her neck, a reminder of the world she'd left behind, while observing women grinding corn, children carrying water, warriors maintaining weapons with practiced care. After 3 days among Taze's people, the strangeness was beginning to feel familiar, even right. "Your hands are restless," the medicine woman said in her careful English, settling beside her. "They want work." Sarah smiled, recognizing the truth in those words. Since their arrival, she'd assisted with 2 births, treated a child's fever, and helped prepare healing salves. The work centered her, gave her purpose among people who still watched her with mixture of curiosity and caution. "I keep thinking of my supplies at home," she admitted. "Medicines I could combine with yours, books we could learn from." The old woman, who had told Sarah to call her grandmother as others did, nodded thoughtfully. "Path between 2 worlds is never straight." She picked up a handful of dirt, letting it sift through her fingers. Must choose where to plant roots. The weight of that choice had been growing heavier since their arrival. Taze would leave soon for the fort, carrying his message of peace. But what then? The settlement would never take her back. She'd be arrested, possibly worse. Yet, could she truly make a life here, bridge the vast gulf between her world and this one? "Tell me of your spirits," grandmother said suddenly. "The one you wear on silver chain." Sarah touched her cross again. "Jesus was a healer," she said slowly. "He taught that love was stronger than barriers between peoples, that compassion matters more than rules." She smiled faintly, though sometimes his followers forget that part. "Ah." Grandmother's eyes crinkled. "Good medicine, that teaching. Not so different from our ways." She reached into her medicine pouch, withdrawing a small object wrapped in soft hide. "Here," was waiting for right time. Sarah carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a delicate silver pendant shaped like a morning star. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Morning star guides between night and day," grandmother explained. "Between shadow and light. Shows path to those who must walk 2 worlds. Her gnarled fingers closed Sarah's hand around the pendant. "Like you must do." Before Sarah could respond, a stir ran through the camp. Taze appeared from the council lodge, his face grave. Sarah felt her heart clench. She knew that expression. News had come. He approached them with measured steps, showing proper respect to his grandmother before turning to Sarah. "Riders came in night. Settlement sends army patrol to fort to stop peace talks." Sarah stood, dust falling from her skirts. "They mean to prevent you from delivering your message." "Yes." His eyes held shadows of old pain. "Some prefer war to understanding, like those who shot me on peace trail." "Then we must reach the fort first," Sarah said firmly. "I know these army officers. Some will listen, especially if white woman speaks with Apache chief," grandmother finished, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "2 voices stronger than one." Taze studied Sarah's face. "Journey will be dangerous, and after..." He paused. "After, you cannot return to your people. Choice must be made." Sarah looked around the camp, at the women who had begun teaching her their crafts, the children who no longer hid from her, the warriors who nodded with cautious respect. She touched both cross and morning star, feeling the weight of 2 worlds. "My people are those who choose healing over hatred," she said quietly, "who build bridges instead of walls." She met his eyes. "I made my choice the night I found you in my barn." Something fierce and tender blazed in Tarzay's expression. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Sarah Mitchell," he said in Apache, then English, "you honor me, honor my people with brave heart." "Brave heart is good," grandmother interjected, rising with dignity, "but journey needs more." She disappeared into her lodge, returning with a small bundle, medicines for both healing and strength, and this, she held out a beaded bracelet, its pattern matching the one on Tarzay's medicine pouch. "Mark of healer among our people. You have earned it." Sarah felt tears press against her eyes as the old woman tied the bracelet around her wrist. The beads caught the morning light, blue and white like the dawn sky above them. "Now go," grandmother said. "Make peace with two voices, heal with two medicines." Her face softened. "But first, kneel." They knelt together in the dust before her. The old woman pressed her hands to their heads, speaking ancient words of blessing. Sarah didn't need translation to understand their meaning. Love, protection, unity, hope. When they rose, the camp had gathered to watch. Sarah saw acceptance in their faces now, mixed with something like pride. She had chosen them as much as they had chosen her. Tarzay's hand found hers, warm and sure. Together they turned to face the path ahead, a path that would take them to the fort, to the future, to whatever waited beyond the merging of their worlds. Behind them, grandmother's voice rose in a prayer that echoed off the canyon walls, blessing. Two hearts that dared to beat as one. The winter wind carried ice from the mountains as Sarah helped prepare for their journey. Around her, the Apache camp moved with practiced efficiency, everyone understanding the stakes of their mission. Women packed dried meat and corn. Warriors checked weapons and horses, and children ran messages between lodges like darting birds. Sarah worked with grandmother, carefully wrapping medicines in leather pouches, some from her settler knowledge, others from Apache wisdom, and many born from the blending of both. Their hands moved in peaceful synchronization, no words needed as they selected herbs and preparations. "Here," grandmother said, holding out a thick blanket woven in intricate patterns of red and black. "Made for such journey. Your colors mixed with ours." Sarah ran her fingers over the tight weave, recognizing European wool mixed with native cotton, settler patterns interlaced with Apache designs. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "like two traditions becoming one." "Like two peoples," grandmother agreed, her weathered face creasing in a smile. "When heart is ready, hands make new beauty." They had spent the night in council, planning their approach to the fort. Sarah's knowledge of army protocols and personalities had proved invaluable, helping identify which officers might be sympathetic to their cause. Now, as morning painted the sky in streaks of rose and gold, the enormity of their task settled over her like the winter wind. Tarzay found her as she finished packing the medicines. He wore his formal chief's attire, leather worked with symbols of authority, the necklace that marked his status, eagle feathers in his hair. But it was the peace pipe, carefully wrapped and secured to his saddle, that carried the most weight. "Scouts report settlement patrol moves slow," he said, helping her secure the medicine pouches. "Many men, heavy weapons. We can reach fort first. If spirits favor us." Sarah nodded, checking Spirit's saddle one final time. The mare had earned her place among the Apache horses, proving her endurance and sure-footedness. Like her rider, she had adapted to this new world with surprising grace. "The captain at the fort," she said, voicing thoughts that had kept her awake. "I treated his daughter's fever last spring. He's a fair man but cautious. We'll need to convince him quickly, before the settlement party arrives with their accusations." "Truth speaks with strong voice," Tarzay replied, but his eyes were troubled. "If they listen, they'll listen." Sarah touched the morning star pendant at her neck, paired now with her silver cross. "They have to. Too many have died already." Warriors gathered around them as they prepared to mount, not just an escort, but witnesses to history. Sarah saw hope in their faces, mixed with the caution of those who had learned hard lessons about trusting settler promises. A young mother approached, baby tied securely to her back, and pressed something into Sarah's hands. It was a small doll, crafted from corn husks and scraps of trade cloth, dressed in a mixture of Apache and settler style. "For good fortune," the woman said shyly in halting English. "Two peoples, one heart." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she secured the doll to her saddle. In the week since her arrival, such gestures had become more common. Small signs of acceptance, of hope, of trust, carefully extended. Grandmother emerged from her lodge one last time, carrying sacred herbs burning in a small clay bowl. The smoke curled around them as she spoke words of blessing, first in Apache, then in carefully practiced English. "May your path be straight, your heart strong, your medicine powerful. May those who hear your words see truth beneath fear. May peace walk beside you, guard behind you, guide before you." As the smoke drifted skyward, Sarah felt the weight of two worlds settling on her shoulders. She was no longer simply Sarah Mitchell, widow and healer. She had become something new, a bridge between peoples, a voice for peace, a gatherer of divided medicines. Taze swung onto his horse beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Around his neck hung both his chief's necklace and a small leather pouch containing pages from her medical journal, their shared knowledge carried into whatever waited ahead. "Ready?" he asked softly. Sarah squared her shoulders, feeling the morning star and cross move together against her skin. "Ready." They rode out as dawn broke fully over the canyon walls, their small party moving like shadows through the winter-touched landscape. Behind them, smoke from the camp's fires rose straight and true, carrying prayers and hopes skyward. Before them lay the fort, the settlement patrol, and the chance to forge something new from the raw materials of conflict. Sarah felt grandmother's blessing wrap around them like the woven blanket, its pattern of mixed traditions a reminder of what was possible when hearts opened beyond the boundaries of fear. Whatever waited at the fort, they carried with them proof that unity was possible, in their medicines, in their stories, in their love that defied generations of hatred. The winter wind sang through canyon walls as they rode, carrying with it the sound of change moving across the land. The fort rose from the desert like a man-made mesa, its wooden walls stark against the morning sky. Sarah and Taze reined their horses to a stop just within sight of the sentries, their small party of warriors holding back at a respectful distance. In her chest, Sarah's heart beat a rhythm of hope and fear. "Remember," she said softly, "Captain Williams will want to save face. We must give him a way to accept peace without appearing weak." Taze nodded, his face composed in the careful mask of leadership. But his eyes, when they met hers, held warmth that gave her courage. "You speak first," he said. "Your voice opens door that fear has closed." They rode forward slowly, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. Sarah had dressed deliberately for this moment, wearing her proper settler's dress, but with the beaded bracelet of an Apache healer visible at her wrist, the morning star pendant hanging alongside her silver cross. "Halt!" the sentry's voice carried, clearly. "State your business." "I am Sarah Mitchell," she called back. "I need to speak with Captain Williams on a matter of urgent peace." A stir of recognition went through the watching soldiers. Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversation. The widow Mitchell, healer, thought she was dead. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the fort's gate creaked open. Captain Williams himself emerged, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. He stopped short at the sight of them, his hand instinctively moving to his pistol. "Mrs. Mitchell," his voice carried equal parts relief and suspicion. "We feared the worst when your homestead was found abandoned. Though I see now," his eyes moved to Taze, recognition dawning. "You keep surprising company, Captain." Sarah kept her voice steady. "You once told me that a leader's true strength lies in knowing when to end a fight, not just how to win one. I'm here to help you prove those words true." She saw the memory touch his face. A long night watching over his, fever-stricken daughter, sharing thoughts about leadership and responsibility. Before he could respond, dust rose on the horizon behind them. The settlement patrol was approaching. "We don't have much time," Sarah said urgently. "Please, hear us out before they arrive. For your daughter's sake, if nothing else." Something shifted in Williams's expression. He studied them for a long moment, then nodded sharply. "Inside, both of you. But any wrong move." "We come in peace," Taze said, his English clear and dignified. "To end the dying on both sides." Inside the fort's walls, Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes as they were led to the captain's office. Through the window, she could see dust clouds growing closer. Time was running out. Williams sat behind his desk, every inch the military. "Commander, speak quickly, Mrs. Mitchell. Explain why I shouldn't arrest you both immediately." Sarah reached into her medicine pouch, withdrawing her journal. "Because I've seen both sides of this conflict, Captain. I've learned that wisdom doesn't belong to any one people." She opened the journal, showing the carefully documented blend of healing traditions. "If medicines can work together, so can those who carry them." "Pretty words," William said, but she saw interest kindle in his eyes as he scanned the pages. "But what does this have to do with everything?" Taze's voice filled the small room. With careful movements, he brought out the peace pipe and began laying out his proposal. Shared hunting grounds, respected boundaries, trade agreements, and most importantly, an end to the cycle of raids and reprisals. Sarah watched, understanding dawn on Williams's face as he realized who sat before him. Not just any Apache, but a war chief with the authority to make such promises. Their words wove together, Sarah explaining settler concerns while Taze addressed Apache needs, demonstrating in their very conversation the possibility of cooperation. Shouts from the fort's yard interrupted them. The settlement patrol had arrived. "Captain," Reverend Kane's voice carried through the window, "that woman harbors a murderer. She's turned traitor to her own people." Williams rose, his face troubled. "These accusations are born of fear," Sarah said firmly. "The same fear that makes us see enemies instead of neighbors, that makes us choose violence over understanding." She touched her pendant. "Captain, you wear a cross like mine. What does it teach about peace? About seeing the divine in all people?" A muscle worked in Williams's jaw. Outside, the shouting grew louder. "Your chief's reputation is known to me," he said finally to Taze. "They say you've never broken your word." "Word is sacred," Taze replied. "Like peace pipe we share, like medicine we carry, like love that teaches new ways to see." For a long moment, the only sound was the increasing chaos from the yard. Then Williams straightened, decision settling over his features like a mantle. "Sergeant," he called, "escort Reverend Kane and his men to my office." It's time they learned the meaning of true strength. Sarah felt Taze's hand find hers as they waited, hope blooming like desert flowers after rain. Together, they had planted seeds of peace in soil, long poisoned by hatred. Now they would see what grew from their shared medicine. 1 year later, spring painted the desert in wild colors, yellow brittlebush, purple sage, and the red ocotillo flowers that local children called Apache tears. In the valley that had once marked the boundary between settler and tribal lands, a new kind of garden grew. Sarah moved between the rows of plants, checking their progress with practiced eyes. Here grew the traditional herbs of her medical training, there the sacred plants of Apache healing. Side by side they flourished, much like the peoples who now shared this land, with cautious hope. "The yarrow is ready for harvesting," she told the young Apache woman working beside her. "Remember, we gather it at dawn. As your grandmother taught us." The girl nodded, her fingers moving confidently among the plants. She was one of many students now, both settler and Apache, who came to learn the combined healing traditions that Sarah and grandmother had begun teaching. "Sarah," Taze's voice carried from the garden's edge. He stood with Captain Williams, both men relaxed in the way of former adversaries who had found common ground. The peace they had forged that day in the fort had held, nurtured by continuous small acts of cooperation and understanding. The trading post they had established here served as neutral ground, a place where both peoples could meet, exchange goods and knowledge, and slowly learn to see each other as neighbors rather than enemies. Sarah's healing practice had become its heart, treating all who came with the combined wisdom of two traditions. She touched the beaded bracelet at her wrist, now accompanied by several others, marking her progress in Apache medicine. Beside them lay the silver cross that reminded her daily that love could indeed build bridges across any divide. "The supply wagon brought more of your medical texts," William said as she approached. "And my daughter asks when you'll visit again. Her baby is due soon." "Tell Mary I'll come when the moon is full," Sarah replied, smiling at the thought of the captain's daughter who had grown from patient to friend. "Grandmother is teaching me the Apache birthing songs. They work wonderfully with settler midwifery." Taze's hand found hers as they watched a group of children, settler and Apache mixed freely, playing with a cloth doll dressed in the styles of both peoples. The toy had become a pattern for others, a small symbol of the change they had helped create. "There is still fear," he said quietly, "still anger in some hearts." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but there is hope too. And hope, like medicine, grows stronger when traditions blend. Around them the garden bloomed with possibility. Each plant represented a choice, to heal rather than hurt, to learn rather than fear, to love rather than hate. Their own love had blazed the trail, showing others that barriers existed only in the mind. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors no single culture could claim, Sarah and Taze walked among the medicines they had planted together. The evening wind carried the scent of sage and the sound of two peoples learning to live as one. In her pocket, Sarah carried a small journal, its pages filled with the growing wisdom of combined traditions. But the truest medicine, she had learned, grew not from any herb or treatment, but from the courage to see past differences, to the heart that beat in all people. "Come," Taze said softly, "time for evening prayers." Together they turned toward home, where settler walls now housed Apache. Wisdom, where their shared life proved daily that love could indeed build bridges stronger than any boundary.